Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar. We're pleased that you're here. Glad that you can join us for International School Success through Quality Staffing. And I'm Kelley Writings. I'm glad to welcome you here. And Tarek, I'd like to introduce my co-host as well for Tarek Sharaf. And so, Tarek, you would like to say a few words?
Thank you, Kelly, for introducing me. It is our pleasure to start this kind of collaboration and the added value that any international educator can be getting from this webinar.
Well, I think whether we're working in the world of teaching or whether we're leading or in administration in international schools, there's a lot of interesting things that are out there to know about, and certainly success in schools. And obviously, that means success for students. That's the most important factor. And so, teachers or leaders, we're all working toward the same kind of thing. So it's going to be a good topic and something I think that people will find really interesting.
Absolutely, especially school owners, school stakeholders, parents as well.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of great things to talk about, and as part of this conversation, I'll give you a little bit of a background about me so that you understand where I'm coming from in my career and my perspective. I've been working in international education now for about a little over 2 decades. I've been in schools though for 32 years. I've worked in schools and worked with schools, starting, of course, as a teacher and then working as a principal and superintendent. I've worked internationally in schools in Mexico, South Korea, and China, which is where I've been for the last 14 years now. And so I've um, seen a lot of different things within schools and have worked in a lot of different capacities, worked with accreditation and hiring and school success, school improvement. I've always been interested in change and the process of change and how it can help to improve the quality of schools and the quality of what we're able to offer for students so that student achievement and families achievement through what they want for their kids can be even better. And so that's something that I've spent a lot of time working on in my career. I've written a couple of books about hiring and the hiring processes. And so it's something that I really am passionate about, the ideas of quality in schools and quality in education, and what that means, especially for the international school sector. Tarek, how about you? What are some of the things that drive you in your career and your passion for education?
Actually, I have the same spirit of what we call it teaching and learning, especially all my life. I started as a student in an international school and then I worked as a teacher, being an international teacher in different countries, different educational systems as well, like IGCSE, IB, and the AP as well. Through those, let's say, more than 55 years now, from being a student and now as an educator, I have faced all of these things. I have experienced what it means to be a student at an international school, to be a teacher at an international school, administrator, consultant, working with different accreditation organizations, working with different publishers as well. I think now, especially during the last 3 decades, international education started to grow rapidly in different regions, and the need to hire qualified staff is growing so fast now. That's why I think our discussions today and your presentation can be helping educators, stakeholders, parents, everyone to understand more about what is meant by international education, what is meant to be an international educator. and how we can be helping students all over the world to improve and to be part of this global society as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and certainly, I think you certainly you've seen the growth of international schools so much in the part of the world where you're living in Turkey, and we see it in the Middle East certainly, but and here where I am in China, it's just been massive. The growth in East Asia in general, the international school growth, and so it's so important. And we're working with hundreds of thousands of students and staff and families around the world, and so such an important area, and it really does impact people because these students are so mobile and they're traveling all around the world with their families, and they're going to be moving from place to place, and so the quality of education matters so much because those students, they deserve to have uh, high quality education, and they're certainly able to get it in many, many schools. And so that's really nice to be able to see.
Absolutely, especially if we go back to the history of international education. The first three schools, one of them, it is already in Turkey. It's called Robert Collegi. The other, it was in Japan, and another one, I think, in Switzerland. Or they started to serve expats, diplomats, or traders, or whatever it is. And starting with these three schools, international education started to grow rapidly during the 20s or 30s of this of the previous century. Now we can see thousands of international schools all over the world, not
Mhm.
only in these parts of the world like China or Asia or whatever, even in the European countries, there is international schools. In the States, there is international schools. So the word international itself, or the definition of an international school, it needs more clarification to understand what is the difference between international education and national education, and how teachers or educators can be providing this kind of service all over the world.
Yeah, that certainly is a growing need. I think it's also important because many of the teachers who are teaching in these kinds of schools, their training has changed somewhat over the years and the type of teachers. So there are many teachers that might be from a certain country and they're teaching domestically in an international school, but they've been trained abroad. They've been either through online education or they've gone to other universities somewhere else. And so they are learning about the styles of international education, and they're learning about why that's different than what maybe they grew up with. And so it's adding a new dimension into international education that maybe we wouldn't have seen as much before, but it's certainly much more common in my experience seeing teachers that are coming from other areas that are not necessarily what we would think of as traditional international school areas. So I really like to see that. It's really interesting, a very important change. So when we look at the success for international schools, and this and some of the success factors that to look at here are same kind of things that they would apply to both international schools and to domestic schools as well. But particularly, we're focusing on the international side of things for the presentation for today. So when we take a look at overall the structure for what we'll have here, so the first part of this presentation is going to be about, I'll talk a little bit about why staffing matters and for the quality of international schools. We'll take some time for that. Tarek then will then spend some time looking at the key hiring characteristics for school success and we'll have a conversation about that. And then at the end, we'll open it up for questions. So from people who are the viewers here, and so you can have a chance to ask some questions about the topics as well that we've talked about. So give an overall view. So it should take us about total in about an hour in altogether. So I've already given you an overview of who I am. I also am working now. I've retired from schools this past year and am working now as an consultant. I began a consulting business called EduNet Pro, where I offer online courses and coaching connected to the books that I have written about hiring and helping people to improve their leadership skills. And so I've been working with that for the last uh, year or so almost. So, why does staffing matter then for quality of international schools? And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. So, here, looking at the ideas of we have to align all the parts of systems in order to have a successful school. And so that system has to start with a vision. So, what is it that the overall vision of the school is? So, here, a leader, a founder of a school, an owner, whoever is creating that school, what are they creating it for? And then when they are creating, have thought of that vision and what they want, then they have to think about the mission. And the mission part is how they're going to go about making that vision into reality. And so, these are the two things that really help to set the school apart and what is making it unique in serving the students that they work with and helping to serve the families who they are working with. But they also have to serve and work with the staff within the school. So it's all part of that school community, which Tarek just mentioned a little bit ago. The whole community is there, all the stakeholders that are part of the school. And so for the working part of the school, there's a work culture. And so every school has its own culture, and there's certain things that we might share in common between schools in general about our attitudes about students and working for students and with students and the subject areas that we're teaching and so on. But there's also unique parts of our work culture that are unique to every school. And so you could have two schools next door to one another, but they have a different work culture because the people have a shared value system within that school. They have certain things that they value and they support that within the school itself. And so all of these things, the vision, the mission, and the work culture all work together within that school to create outcomes. And those outcomes then are student achievement that happens, the results of what all the work and the labor that people put into it, whether it's the students or whether it's the staff who are working, all of these things help to create these kinds of outcomes. And we hope that all of those parts are going to work together to create positive, successful outcomes for students. That's what we want. But we all know that sometimes that doesn't quite work out that way. And so what happens there, so when we're looking at employees in particular, we're looking at a lot of different things that employees do. The teacher is not just teaching in the classroom. The principal is not just leading the school, but we do lots of different parts of our job, and we're all about the full employee, that we're looking at all the different parts of what we do in our roles, not just the public roles, but there's the relationship things, the communication, the all of the different things that we add beyond our traditional job assignment, the job description. So all these things that we see here on the screen are all part of that job performance. And so we can't just look at quality employee only through seeing them how they perform as a teacher in the classroom, for example, or how a principal leads and supervises staff, but rather we have to look at it through this 360-degree view of what the employee offers all the way around. So it's the traditional part of the role, as well as the things like the extracurricular duties that people do, the administrative functions, attending meetings and taking care of deadlines, doing the paperwork, supervision that they have to do, all those things. Sometimes they're glamorous parts of the job, sometimes they're not so glamorous, but they all have to be done and they have to be done well. And every school has a different way that these things are done. And so it a school needs to spend time then finding people who are going to fit in with all of the expectations that they need. But how does that happen? And so that's the part of the hiring and recruitment process. But sometimes we all know that occasionally that while most people that are hired to work in a school do a fine job and they care and they're passionate about what they're doing and they like working with students, but sometimes we know also that sometimes those people that get hired are not a good fit for the school, and sometimes they end up with kind of being a problem employee. And sometimes that does happen. And it's not done on purpose, of course. And so it's something that the process of how the school goes about hiring, sometimes that needs to be examined closely because we know that with problem employees that there's a lot of issues that come with it. It's not just the performance of that employee, but certainly negativity that they can bring can be quite draining to students. It can be very draining to staff who have to work with them for their teams. It's uh, very discouraging when we have an employee who doesn't meet the standards that is expected in the school and doesn't really seriously try to improve. They might hear the things that need to be done differently, but they're just not meeting that expectation with serious effort. They listen, they might hear what the administrator, the supervisor is telling them, but they don't really try to improve. Sometimes they don't see a reason to improve. They don't want to. Change is difficult, and if they're used to working a certain way, then they're not going to easily change. Sometimes they don't see a reason to because they think, well, what I've been doing is good enough. I don't need to do that. But then also all of the time that we are spending working in meetings and dealing with employees when they're challenging, and it can be incredibly time draining, it's energy draining, it's difficult for that employee, it's difficult for the leaders and supervisors who are working with them, and it's difficult for students and for families who have to work under that employee as well. And so these things happen. So how do we go about finding the right employees to fit within our school culture is certainly a major importance when it comes to hiring because the I always say that with administrators and leaders that the most important work we do is hiring. If we don't have the right teacher in the school, if we don't have the right uh, other leaders who we hire to be part of the team, then we're not going to have as strong success. We're not going to have that alignment that I just mentioned earlier. When we look at some of the literature, we see, some of the books that have particularly been influential for me are books like Good to Great in Transforming School Culture, Hiring for Attitude. I mean, there are many books, but these particularly are have really shaped how I look at things and how I look at the world of hiring, particularly, and how vital that is for a school. So, in Good to Great, Jim Collins was writing about the idea, we wrote about many ideas, but one of the key ones is getting the right people on the bus. And so here we want to make sure that we've got the right kind of employee with the right ideas that are going along with our bus as we travel along our path to what our vision for the school is and for what our vision for the mission that we have and how we're getting there. We want people on board who are also with us and who agree with that same idea. Anthony Muhammad wrote in his book about transforming school culture, and he talked about four broad categories of employees, and that everybody fits in one of these. So there's the believer, the person who fits with the school and agrees with what's going on. A tweener is somebody who's kind of agrees with this idea of what we're doing, but they kind of have their own beliefs, but they're kind of in between. They're not really sure where they're supposed to be. A fundamentalist is somebody who kind of says, well, this is the way I learned how to do teaching and I learned how to lead, and I'm going to do it this way. Even though times might be changing, they're reluctant to want to change with it because what has worked in the past has been successful for them, and they may not want to move forward or move to a different pathway easily. The survivor is somebody who's toward the end of their career and they're just saying, I'm waiting for retirement. I'm just ready to move on. And that's where I am. I'm going to just do what I need to do to move from one day to the next. They think the way they think. And so we have to work with that if we're a leader, but then we also have to think about how can we effectively work with them to help them to improve and help them to see the vision that we have for the school as a whole, and how do we move forward, especially when it comes to things like student success. And so another book, when looking at Mark Murphy in his book about hiring for attitude, one of the big takeaways from his book was that he had done a study of 20,000 new hires. And in those, of those new hires, within a year and a half, almost half of those employees had left their place of employment. And most of them were fired, or they had poor reviews, they had reprimands, they had a lot of serious issues. And in the case of these 46% who left their employment, 89% of them were because of poor attitude. It wasn't about their skills. And so that tells us that attitude, how valuable that is and how meaningful it is. When I read that, it was a real eye opener because it helped me to realize how critical it was to look at the attitude of employees that were when we're hiring, not just to think about their skills. Employees can learn new skills, but their attitude is who they are. It's the fundamental part of who they are. And so that is not going to change as easily. And so it comes down then to hiring for attitude, which is what his book is titled, actually. And so it's a main part of what makes a difference between the way a lot of hiring is done traditionally in schools, which is hiring for skills first, and then maybe looking at attitude. And rather, it should be the other way around. So some of the things that Murphy found that were reasons why poor fit uh, happened in employees, where their attitude some of it had to do with things like coachability, which about a quarter of those people faced in that study of 20,000 people that he looked at. Emotional intelligence, motivation, temperament, technical competence. Remember, that's the skills. That's only 11%. So there's a lot of different things. It doesn't mean that they're all bad fits, and it doesn't mean that they're all have poor attitudes. It's not about that, but it's about, are they able to change and do the things? Every employee has certain things they do really well, and some have things that they don't do as well. And so, how can we help people to grow? Because as leaders, that's what we want to do. Just like as teachers, we want all of our students to succeed, not just the ones that have a good attitude, but we should want everybody to succeed. So we want to see the same thing when it comes for employees as a school leader. That's what we're looking for. And that's what encouraged me then to write my book, which is coming out in just about 3 weeks' time. It's called The Gift Hiring Method. And that's what I was looking at and have spent the last part of the last decade working with hiring and how to create a hiring system within a school so that we can hire people that have the right attitude, that match what the school needs, matching all the alignment of all those things that I've just mentioned earlier to make sure that student achievement is possible. And so that's what this method is about. And so particularly it's looking at trying to find the best fit candidate. That's where you see the star here on this grid. So when we're looking at skills and we're looking at attitude, we ideally want to find candidates that have high skills and have a good attitude that matches our school. And so that's the best fit candidate. But sometimes we're going to find candidates that may not have the highest skills or may not have the best attitude that fits for our type of school. So then we have to figure out which are the ones that we need to work with to try. Perhaps we can hire them, but we're going to need to work with them to help them to improve. Or some of them just aren't going to be the kinds we need to be even hiring at all. Those are the poor fit candidates that have weak skills and an attitude that doesn't fit with our school at all. And so those kind of candidates we would want to avoid hiring. But the problem is that when it comes to hiring, we don't always see what it is that the candidate is like. If we don't ask the right kind of questions, we're not going to know what they're like. And they want a job. And we as hiring leaders, we want to hire people. And so sometimes we get a little blinded to seeing that. We don't sometimes see the problem areas that the candidate may have. So we've got to ask questions that help us to find the best fit candidate. We're moving then the school from where it is today to where we want it to be. And we are then designing a school process in order to help hire candidates that are going to move us toward that desirable team qualities that we want. And that's going to move the school toward improvement. And improvement can only happen when everybody is on board and working toward that and working to make that happen. And so that improvement has to come from attitude. We have to be open to change, open to doing new things, and we have to be open to realizing that the work we're doing is going to help students to improve their outcomes. It's about their achievement. So this is an important part of the school culture, and it can happen. We can change the culture of the school so that it can move forward, and it will with the right processes. So we have to think about then, if we're going to move the school forward, move the culture forward, we have to think a little bit about what makes our school unique compared to all the other schools that are in our area. So we have to be aware of our competitor schools and then think about, okay, what positions us uniquely within our market. We need to think about what does it take for us to succeed at our school? What makes that different from what it might be in other schools? And then we have to think about what are the things that our staff must have? What must their beliefs be if they're going to be successful in helping our school to improve? And so these are the things that we need to think about then and how we structure the hiring processes within our schools in order to find the candidates that fit the right work culture that we want to create for our school. So then once we've identified those processes and we've identified the work culture, have we been putting those throughout the whole school, not just in the interview, but are they evident in other parts of the school as well? So, for example, are they in the actual job descriptions for every single category of job within the school? Have all the recruitment literature that we use, the interview questions, the reference check forms, all of those should contain reference to the school culture, the work culture of the school. The evaluations that we're using, the interview or the evaluative tools that we use in those evaluations for staff, for teachers, for leaders, all of that should contain reference to the employee work culture. The presentations that we do, the teaching that goes on in the classroom, the awards that we give to both students and to staff, things how we promote the school and our ads should also highlight this work culture. When we start putting these things all together, it's going to amplify that. It's going to just help that school culture to become known to everybody. And it's used then to create a common bond between all of us because we all know that's what the school is about and that's what we expect. So that helps us then to move from that random system of arrows where most people kind of go in the same direction, but there's a few people who are off doing their own thing, to moving to a system where everybody is aligned and we have aligned arrows where we're all moving toward the right target, that what we've identified within our school as the right target to be. So that's how we're going to move toward system success. And so getting then the system to work is an important part of it. That's what accreditation processes are, the change process and how we move into change to improve our schools and improve our systems. That's what we do this for. So these are part of the books that I've had. You can see the QR code there if you're interested in learning a little bit more about those. But these are the systems and finding the right school. So if I'm an employee and I'm looking for a new school, I want to get into the right place. I want to get into a school that matches my beliefs. And so that's where looking at that book, Teacher Lead Abroad, is going to be particularly helpful. And then, of course, as an administrator and hirer, if I'm trying to hire people in recruitment for staff, then the gift hiring method is going to be helpful for that. And so that's where I am with this part of the process. And so, Tarek, what do you think?
Thank you, Kelly, for uh, all of these informations, especially the last presentation, which has the picture of books as stir, so which shows that the knowledge follows like stirs or like ladders, which will be taking us to the higher levels of knowledge or success. Let's start our discussions or the key hiring characteristics for student success in international schools through some questions and answers. The first question is, you mentioned at the beginning the vision and mission of the school. So this is one of the key of hiring people. How this can be influencing the decision of hiring educators, starting from leaders and below. What do you think? How the mission and vision can be complying with the perspective of hiring?
Oh yeah, that just is so important. That is the heart of what the school is about. And every school, if you go into school conferences and you hear people talk about their schools and they're presenting about what their schools are about, every single school has a different vision and mission, every one of them. And they have certain qualities and characteristics that they're looking for their schools. They have certain core beliefs in how education should be handled in their community. And so, as a school leader, we have to be really highly aware of what that vision is, what that mission is. And so, if we're hiring people, we need to hire based on what that vision and that mission is. If I'm looking for a job and I have certain core beliefs that are important to me as an educator, then I want to find a school that also matches those beliefs. I don't want to be in a place that doesn't fit that. So, an example of that is maybe we have a school that really highly emphasizes teamwork and they feel teaming and teamwork is very important for students, for staff, everywhere. It's demonstrated throughout the school. And so that's fine. And so we'd want to hire people. We want people to be in the school community who value the idea of teamwork and working together. On the other hand, you might have a school that wants to encourage more independent thinking, and people, maybe particularly in small schools where there isn't a lot of teamwork because the school's very small, hiring people then who are independent minded and who are able to take things on and work independently to create things and to do things to move the school forward, that makes good sense. But if an employee comes into that school who is very team oriented and they're working in a school that is not particularly team oriented, then it's not going to be a good match. And the same way around. If somebody is very independent thinking and they move into a school that's highly team oriented, it's not going to be a very successful fit for them. And so, knowing what that school is about, they're not going to change their vision and their mission, nor should they. But rather, if they have their true, whatever their true north is, their vision, their mission, and they go toward that, then they want to bring people on board who are going to be part of that and who help to support that and encourage that. And so that is why it's so important to be aware of that. Some schools just don't have it very well articulated at first, and they don't know, they don't understand, and but they need to get that core part of who they are because that's the foundation of their success in schools.
Perfect. This will be taking us to another question that as a teacher, if I'm moving from one school to another, and as a school leader who will be hiring this teacher, you mentioned the most important thing is the attitude. How would the attitude can be evaluated during an interview, especially what kind of a teacher the school leader will be looking for? Is it influenced by parents? Because sometimes parents are having an impact even on the type of teachers that would be hired by the school. What would be the best thing for this kind of attitudes?
Well, I think that goes back to the work culture that we're trying to create within our school. So when we identify what we want as our desired work culture, then we create questions in our interviews that are going to help to identify do the candidate fit in with that work culture. And then we ask questions that are very scientifically prepared, really, that are going to be kind of open-ended questions that aren't going to have a clear, obvious answer to the candidate. But we, as the interviewer, know what we're looking for in that answer, in that response. And so we want people to tell us about who they really are and how they really believe, what they really believe in terms of their practice as a educator. And so it takes some time to develop that process, but it's something that I talk about quite a bit in my book. It's a key part of what we can do when we're interviewing. So an example of a question is if we say, "Can you tell us about a time when or when you had when you disagreed with your supervisor?" And the purpose of asking that question is we want people to tell us about, okay, when they had a disagreement, because everybody has a disagreement at some point in time, every single one of us. But what we want to find is, okay, if somebody has a disagreement, are they going to sit down and have an actual genuine conversation with their supervisor to express their concern, to share what they're thinking and hear what the supervisor is thinking? And can they come to a common understanding? Or do they not talk about it at all? And so almost always the candidate is going to tell us about a situation, and then they sometimes will say, "Oh yeah, I talked with the supervisor and this is what they said." No, they told me some things that I'd never thought about before and I didn't realize that. And so I'm thinking, well, maybe they know some things I don't know, and so I'll go with it. I'll go along with it. Or sometimes they'll say, "Yeah, I talked to the supervisor and I told them what I was thinking and they changed their mind and they said, "Okay, well, we'll try it your way." And sometimes they'll just say, "Well, I didn't talk with a supervisor. I went and talked to all my friends and we argued and complained about it, but we didn't do anything else." And they'll tell you. And so that is going to tell us a lot about who they are as a candidate and how they work within their style, what works for them. And so we want to find that right attitude. We could certainly ask questions as well, just like what you've mentioned about parents and how the teacher works with the parent or how the administrator works with the parent. And so, okay, how can you, we ask an open-ended question that might be something like, oh, can you tell me about a time when a parent had a disagreed with something you were doing in the classroom? Now, we don't say, and how did you solve it? Because we want to find out, did the candidate actually solve that problem or not? But rather, we just want to find out, okay, what kind of problem did they have with the parent and how did they work with the parent to do something? And almost always, if somebody is a problem solver, they're going to tell you what they did to solve the problem. And if they aren't a problem solver, they're not going to tell you. And that's going to be something we're going to go, oh, we're going to pick up on that when we're trying to hire, because we don't want to be, I would prefer to work with people who are problem solvers, not what I call problem bringers. And so I don't want that. And I want to make my life easier. And so that's what we all then want to share, that common belief about being problem solvers when we're working toward that, and share that within our school culture.
Great, perfect. As we believe that as humans, when we are looking for a job, the first thing is for bread and cheese. So this would be the first priority that anyone who will be leaving or who will be looking for a job is the bread and cheese. Others can be looking for experience. Others can be looking for exploring different cultures. What do you prefer? What type of educator that the school leader will be taking or will be considering to hire one of those in his or her team?
Yeah, that's a really, and I think that a lot of times depends on the type of location where the school is. A lot of times the type of teacher who's available to them. Sometimes they don't have a choice. I prefer to work with people who are trained teachers that have a teaching degree and have a teaching license. That's my personal preference, but some locations just may not have that, and so there may be teachers that have come into the career, maybe weren't intending to be a teacher originally. Maybe they went to university, they got a degree somewhere else, and then they kind of just happened into teaching. Maybe they started teaching English as a second language and they went, oh, I kind of like this, and they were just doing it. But a lot of times those kind of teachers, they don't have all of the background and the training of a teacher, and so they struggle sometimes with um, their practice. And so it's okay to hire people like that, especially if they have a good attitude. But then I want to make sure that I'm supporting them and helping them to grow their career by getting a new license and making sure that they're getting some training. So there are lots of online programs that are available that they can get training through systems in the UK, the US, South Africa, and so on, where they can get their license and they can learn how to be teachers. They could do it online. So for international schools, that's particularly powerful. And for those teachers that I talked about earlier, that were um, those teachers that are international, they work in an international school, but maybe they're domestic teachers, but they want to learn more about the international system, they can do these online courses as well to learn and get their teaching degree and teaching license in the international system so that they can know something of it. That really is powerful for them. And so it helps to move the school forward. Not, every school, every country, they have people who are there for different reasons that are, and the pool of candidates is not always going to be very, very deep. And so sometimes you have to move with what we've got. And so, but no matter what, if we are always hiring for attitude, whether a person is a trained teacher or not a trained teacher, if they've got the right attitude and they're willing to grow, we can help them. And if we can help them, they're going to then be better teachers. They're going to serve their students better. And ultimately, that helps the school.
Great. So now it will be taking us to the question of how far professional development can contribute for to the effectiveness of staffing in international schools.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the professional development. I think for me, in my experience in working with teachers, that and hiring, the number one question I think most teachers will ask about is the professional development. They want to grow and they want to learn more, and how do we as schools help them to be able to do that? So part of it is that we can support them with the training that I just mentioned, for the online training through getting their teaching license and their teaching degrees if they don't have it. But the school can also provide professional development. There's a great amount of resources that are out there now, especially with online. I'm sure that you've seen it as well, Tarek, that there's just so many conferences and workshops and webinars, just like this one, that people can learn from, that's part of their professional development that they can do now, that's available. And it's all completely, much of it is free or very low cost. And so it's something that really provides people with some tremendous opportunities, things that when I started my career was not really available. And so certainly also looking at books, and being able to, I can download an ebook anywhere in the world and can read it. And so that also wasn't available early on in my career. And so if I wanted to do something, back in the 90s when I first started teaching, and the way I got professional development then was vastly different than how it would be done now. And so there's just not any problem that's out there that I can't learn a lot about how to solve that and problem solve and learn and grow. Um, Without, I can go to all kinds of resources, webinars, courses, online courses, all sorts of things, and go to conferences and so on as well, some of the more traditional ways. So it's a valuable component that's absolutely necessary for every school to engage in, is professional development. If they're not doing that, then they're not going to grow as a school. And I'm sure you've seen that too with all of your work with accreditation and how important that is, the professional development, so that people can learn how they can help to improve their school and through the accreditation process and growing.
This will be giving us another um, concern. We have like CVs with so many attachments of professional development, of courses, of teaching licenses, like these things. But when it comes to a practical thing, for sure, as a teacher or as an educator, we can be treated like students. We are taking the professional development workshops or whatever it is, but sometimes it's the mindset. There is a resistance of change, the resistance of transformation. I'm used to a certain strategy of teaching, and the school provided me with a certain kind of professional development, or I went for some courses or like these things. But when it comes to practice, they are supposed to implement what they have learned. So, what do you think as a school leader when you are hiring someone with all of these kind of certificates or professional development courses and these things, and they are good in their paperwork, in doing curriculum mapping, doing lesson plans and these things. But when they are applying in the lesson, there is a big gap. How we can be spotting these things during the hiring process.
I think that it's about, in part, also the questions that we're asking and how we go about doing that. So anybody can just say, well, I did this course or I did an online training, and they can get a certificate. But it's using it. So just like what you've mentioned, how do they actually apply what it is that they've learned? We've all read books, I'm sure, that maybe we've learned something from the book, but did we actually put it into use and practice? Maybe, maybe not. And so I think the questions then that we can ask are things like, Tell me about a time when you did a recent professional development practice. And they're going to tell you about that. And then they're also going to say, and here's how I used it in my practice. We don't have to ask them, did they use it? But rather, they're going to tell us that automatically. As a problem solver, we're going to do that. You, I'm sure, as you have your everyday conversations, you're a problem solver, you're going to automatically, your automatic response is going to be, here's a problem, and here's how I went to go about trying to solve that problem. And you're going to explain that. And so the same thing is going to happen with the professional development. Probably they're going to say, well, this is what I found. It was a problem area that I wanted to grow in. I wanted to learn more about. I've seen this in my practice, and here's what I did to try to solve this, and here's how I used it. And here's what I saw as a result of that in what I did, whether I was working in the classroom or whether I was working as a leader. And so uh, I think that would be a valuable way then to look at professional development and see then, okay, are they actually using it rather than, I went to this conference, in some exotic location, and then you go, wow, I went to a conference, but then you don't see anything coming from that when they come back to the school because they're not using it into real practice. Well, then that's something we need to hear about. So at least we could tell a little bit about what it is. And I think, and a lot of times I think when I see these certificates that people do, I mean, if they're working towards something where I can see kind of a common theme, then I'd want to match, okay, are they talking about things in their interview responses that match with some of the topics that they've learned about in these professional development courses? And can I see evidence? Do I hear evidence of that in their conversation and what they're talking about in learning and how they present themselves? So it's I want to I want to be able to hear that people are using it and have thought about these things, and maybe they're not using it and making perfect sense of it yet, but they're trying to make sense of it and improve and change as a result.
Great. So the myth, which is differentiation and using technology. I believe that one of the aspects of having the differentiation strategy is the way of gathering data. Sometimes, if the school is providing a benchmark testing like MAP, iReady, or they are using the exact path from Edmentum or whatever it is, they have a quite good idea about the learning gaps for the students. What would be the best fit for an educator to understand how to use technology and how to use the data from these kind of benchmark assessments? Does this play a role in hiring teachers or leaders as well or not?
Yeah, I think that the idea of how they use the data, there's so much data that's available that's out there that people have they can take advantage of and use in their classroom and looking at the whole school data and so on. But are they using that or to their advantage or not? And so I think the conversations that we have within schools need to, and almost always need to concern data. And so that is something that's really important. So when I'm hearing in interviews, I want to hear people are actually talking about the data. Are they actually using it and how they're using it? I think that's something that's really valuable and important for them to demonstrate. And so if people don't talk about that, then to me that's a flag. That's a caution area because it helps me to kind of see that maybe they're not really data driven too much. And it's not saying that everything needs to be about data, but certainly data helps to drive why we do certain things because the numbers tell us something, the statistics, the evidence shows us something, and we want to be able to improve what we're doing, but we can't really know what we need to work on improving if we don't know how things actually are. And that's what the data tells us. And so using that is really important. And then making that part of our everyday conversation within a school is valuable. People who are data driven, they're going to tell us that in the interviews for sure. They're going to give us a lot of different evidence that shows how they're data driven. And then part of our job as hiring leaders is we want to ask questions in a way that help to give them an opportunity to talk about that data.
Great, perfect. And being an international educator, it would be giving an opportunity for leaders or for stakeholders to understand that when they are hiring someone who understands what is the culture of the international school, the diversity of cultures at this school, um, the different learning styles of students, especially they are coming from different cultures and different countries and all of these things. What do you think? What would be the best fit in this case? Someone who is teaching science, for sure, science means that the teacher should be aware about the scientific skills, mathematical skills, language skills as well. And they are having students with uh, a learning style which is below standards, and someone on standards and above standards, about differentiation again. But here it is concerned with the language barriers. How would be the attitude preferred for this kind of teachers?
Yeah, I think that is something where we, as hiring leaders, we've got to think about the kind of teacher that we need for specific kinds of classrooms. And that's where we're thinking about the student that we have to work with. And so we've got to hire people that can work within that system because the kids aren't going to change. Their
Yeah,
language is what it is, and they're not going to change. We're not suddenly going to get a new set of students who are all magically in tune with the certain language and completely fluent in it. That's not going to happen. So the teacher has to work with all of those kids. We can't just work with just the few that we want to work with. We've got to work with everybody. And so, as the hiring leader, we've got to think about, okay, how do we find the person who fits with that? So we want to learn, and in a little bit, it's a skill-based thing because it does have to do with, are they used to working with students who are learning English as a second language, and what are some of the strategies that they use to address those kinds of students? But then they've also got to have the right attitude about working with that kind of student. And so the hiring leader has to ask and develop a question set that fits with that and helps to identify, is the teacher comfortable with doing that, working with that kind of student or not? If you ask them outright, do you like working with students who don't know English as a first language? Oh, absolutely. I'm totally on board with this. They're all going to say they agree, but then in reality, they might have a different thing. So we've got to ask questions in a way where we're asking an open-ended question, and then we're saying things like, okay, give me an example of a time when you've worked with a student who struggles with English, if English is the language of instruction in the school. So, then you're going to hear what are the strategies that they're using. Maybe they're going to talk about data and what they use to identify, here's the problem area, why it was a problem, what I did with working with a student, here's how I tried to solve that problem. Here's who I was talking with, the colleagues I talked with, and so on, trying to understand the situation better. Those are the things that we want to find. But if we just ask an outright question, do you like working with students who struggle with English as a second language? Oh, yeah, absolutely. I love them. That's not going to do enough. That's not going to get where we want to be.
great, perfect. So I think now it's time if we have any questions.
Here I see somebody is typing a question now. Tarek, you and I have been talking about this now for what, about 6 months doing this. So we
Yeah,
finally made it happen. 6 months, 8 months, something like that.
finally.
And that's the one of the great things of here we're able to do this, and we're on opposite sides of the globe basically, and yet we're able to make this happen and come together and meeting in this virtual space. It's pretty unbelievable, pretty amazing.
That's the new word. And as we mentioned before, what is called now international education is growing so fast, and the teaching career even is growing so fast. And for sure, for this generation or the coming generation as teachers, they will be looking forward to be a mobile teachers or international teachers, and for sure they will be looking for the best for them.
Yeah.
And schools, for sure, they will be looking for the best.
Well, and then with more schools that are out there, more competition that there is, so there's a high demand for teachers, and to be able to work in these schools, especially in those parts of the globe where these international schools are growing more and more and more, and so there is really a huge demand for this kind of a style of education in school. Absolutely. So, do we have any questions? I think we have somebody think behind Youssef. You're still writing one. Okay, there we go.
Just how can I
Yes, it's a bit long.
No, it's okay.
So,
It's okay.
so is your work as a teacher, or are you working as an administrator in a school?
Actually, I'm a teacher. I'm an English teacher, but I get to deal with the administrators, with the supervisors. So we get to know the problems that the students are facing and the problems as the administrators and the supervisors are having as well. So I just wanted to have some sort of knowledge or to have some sort of answers. If I can help them, if I can share it with them, especially after this magnificent webinar.
Yeah. So, Tarek, do you want to lead off with something?
Actually, this is one of the concerns that all teachers or even sometimes administrators are facing. The attitude itself, how we can be communicating with each other, especially if we are lacking certain levels of attitude. In this case, it can be one-to-one, and we can be discussing our concerns. We can be showing it. What do you think if we do this? I have experienced this. I have seen this practice in a different school. What do you think if we can be uh, doing it in our school? I think this would be a kind of conversation or communication that can be helping to integrate things in the team. What do you think, Kelly?
Yeah, I think it's that kind of goes along with the culture of what the school is, and the so I think as well that if even if it's not just within the school culture, if you want to think about within the classroom culture, um, if you are encouraging and really fostering students to think about, they're having a growth mindset and thinking about ways that they can change or do things differently and grow and challenge themselves. And you make that then a part of the regular classroom, and if then you and your colleagues are doing the same thing and they do it all in their classrooms as well, then the student, when they're moving from classroom to classroom, they're all going to be experiencing this culture of basically that's the growth mindset. And so I think that that is really a valuable expectation that we would want students to have in the classroom, but it can't just be only in the one classroom. It should be everywhere. But you can certainly model it in your own classroom and in creating lessons and discussion things where they are able to do show that kind of growth and think about how they can grow and come up with new ideas. And I think that's pretty exciting. And most times, my experience is that it may not happen immediately, but it's going to be something that's going to grow over time. And I think that it can take off and really improve the overall culture of the school for learning. And so you could start with this professional development conversation, having a meeting, having something like that as a way to start it among teachers, and then you begin implementing it across the different classrooms. There's a lot of exciting possibilities. Does that help
Thank you
to
so much.
answer the question, Hein
Yes,
Youssef? Yeah.
it really helped. And the reason why I asked the question is sometimes, like you mentioned, Mr. Kelley and Dr. Tarek, that people are really adamant to change. They refuse to change. And
Yeah.
when I get to address someone about some minor issues that they are having or that they are facing with their students, they tend to be very hostile and no, we know what we're doing. We got this.
Yeah.
So the thing is, I want to help them because I do have a little bit of experience. I have been teaching for 10 years. So I just want to pass it on that this is not the right approach to handle this kind of problem. So that actually
Well,
was the reason why I asked my question.
you might think about this book here I shared just a moment ago, the
Great.
Transforming School Culture by
Good
Anthony
culture.
Muhammad, because that's
Yeah.
one of the things that he talks about in that book is
Mm,
exactly that type of teacher that you just mentioned, the ones that kind of that they are very set in their ways, and that here the fundamentalists might be kind of the fitting of that type of a teacher. They have their very set way of this is how things are done, and this is the way I've always done it, and I don't really want to change.
exactly.
And
Exactly.
he gives some ideas then how you can work with a person who does
Mm,
something that is sort of in that mindset, and how can you help them to see things a little differently. And it can work. I've used those kind of strategies with some people that I've worked with, and it has been helpful in doing that. Yes,
yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
absolutely.
And yes, it takes time. Yes.
It
Thank
it
you.
does. It sure doesn't happen overnight. That's for sure.
Mm,
And for sure, we're going to have even more webinars concerning all of these things, schools improvement after hiring, and how we can be using what is called evidence-based system for schools to improve. So thank you again, Kelly.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to doing more of these webinars, and so we appreciate you coming and joining us. To those in the audience who are watching, and we'll have the video coming up. We'll be posting that within the next day or so that you can have a look at it online as well if you want to review. So thank you again. Thank you, Tarek.
Kelly, and thank
Till the next time.
everyone. Thank
All
you.
right.
Bye bye.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
so